a video last week on this very channel, we talked about soft cheating. A compulsive cheater had made a throwaway account on Reddit to talk about how everybody cheats, and the best way to do that is not with really overt stuff, but with things that can be mistook for genuine mistakes. And then over the weekend, a cheating scandal, we'll call it that, it's kind of a bit of he said, she said if we're honest, but a cheating scandal broke that have essentially highlighted a potential soft cheat in the wild. The reason I'm covering it for this video is that the example I'm about to give you, I'm going to go through both sides of the story. It's really interesting for like many different reasons. One is the soft cheat through line from the previous video. Two is the idea of he said, she said, Google Docs and apologies for potential cheats. Three is a judge call that many people did not agree with, and I'll be honest, I don't either. Why was that judge called the way it was? And does judging need to have a bit of introspection or reflection on the script, if you will, of how these sort of situations are judged? And on top of all that, there's also some bigotry in the community. There's a lot to unpack and a lot to go through in this video. If you're looking to pick up a single product or seal product or pre-order anything from Drift, coolstuffinc.com, 5% off your order by using the code KENOBI at checkout, and it helps support the show. I'm going to start up front by explaining that this is not a witch hunt, nor is it an invitation for you, the audience, to go and harass anyone involved in this, from judges to players. If we're honest, it's kind of run its course. I think it's better as a cautionary or conversational piece about what happens in the future regarding these incidents in judging. Also, I don't want to get on a soapbox about this, but there has been an overt use of transphobia towards one of the parties involved because they are trans, and I think that's fucking sickening. I do not want to shy away from covering things like this because one person involved is or has a protected characteristic, like in this case is a trans person, but at the same time I'm also aware that the scrutiny under which certain people are held, the lens under which they're held by the community or groups around them, is much more severe when you're not the norm. People will use this as an excuse to spit their hatred. We saw it on Twitter, we saw it on Reddit. And I'm just going to say it right now, trans rights are human rights, and I'm absolutely in support of that. These kind of conversations should not break out into hateful tirades against people. It's just so obviously a thing that I'm ashamed that I have to say, but here we are. If that's what you're after, then you're not really welcome here, and you're not really part of the conversation. You're a bigot, and that isn't helpful. Perhaps have a little bit of self-reflection yourself if you're just spitting hate on the internet because you don't like someone else's gender identity or how they want to be. It's gross. Don't be like that. There is also a bit of like, we knew they were a cheater already and it's a pattern of behavior, but there's just no receipts shared. So I'm going to chalk all that up to being there is a difference of opinion between certain groups of people. Some people like this person, some people don't. And it's led to this like, they're a known entity. I want to come into this conversation as neutral as I possibly can be with these people because I have no point of reference for any of them. With that out of the way, let's have a look at both Justin's side of things and Nicole's side of things. And then the conversation's mainly going to be around the outcome with the judge call and how it was handled after that. There's an extra caveat of sporting conduct and etiquette as well that I'm going to go into. Let's start with Julian's Google Doc. I'll link in the description below for a full-on read, but I'm going to use just B-roll and similar to illustrate a little bit, so it's just not me reading white blocks of text at you the whole time. I do dislike doing that in videos, really. As an aspiring pro player, I was excited at the announcement of the return to GPs. More chance to make the Pro Tour. My preparation for Spotlight Series Atlanta started over 2 months ago with my team SpiceRack.gg, and my coach and good friend, Nathan Stewart. I put in over 30 hours a week with countless 2 AM testing sessions and finally settled on a gruel list that I was extremely confident in. All this is to say, like many others, I worked really hard to get a good result in Atlanta, playing the game that I love. My weekend started strong with a 5-0 in the Friday RECQ. Saturday's main event started off strangely, however, losing 1 round to Toxic, of all things, but we play on. After 5 rounds, I was 4-1. Round 6, I was paired into Nicole Dubin, someone I knew and well enough and respected as a player. My gruel aggro versus her Esper Pixie. Game 1 was a back and forth, but I started to fall behind and ultimately things are not looking good. In the final turns, I drew a card for turn and scratched my head as I was thinking if I had any outs. But before I could do anything, Nicole quickly drew for her turn. I was confused but had the withdrawal to say, wait, I'm not passing. We called a judge who ruled it was a miscommunication and Nicole took an extra card. Nicole appealed the remedy of me choosing a card from my hand to shuffle back in, as the other cards in her hand were known from previous bounce spells with a Pixie, and she won the appeal. I had no issue with this whatsoever, honest miscommunication. Game 2 was quick. I got out a fast start, she missed the land drop and I won. Game 3, I was reasonably ahead in the early turns until she drew a T-lock. Still, I was applying pressure with not overcommitting to a sweeper, so things were going according to plan. I was starting to run her out of cards with questing druids, and her life total was getting very low. Then the match took a turn. Nicole was at 3 life, and I was at 8. It was Nicole's turn, and I was hellbent with an Emberheart Challenger in play. Nicole had 6 lands in play, 3 cards in hand, one of which was the known Hopeless Nightmare, and a 2/2 Nurturing Pixie in play. She moved to combat and attacked with Pixie, putting me to 6 life. At this point, she tanked for a long while. Suddenly, her energy and pace changed. She started moving her cards cards at lightning speed, knocked some dice on the table, quickly played the Hopeless Nightmare, passed the turn, and announced the scroll shift on the Hopeless Nightmare on my draw step, all while at frantic pace. Now, there's something really important to say as an aside here, is that this is Julian's perspective. The pacing at which Nicole played with prior to this or at the time is completely and utterly being told to us through the lens of the opponent who feels slighted. I'm not saying there wasn't a change in demeanor. I'm not saying that Julian is lying or anything like that. I'm just saying that in these accounts where we look at he said and she said, we really need to understand that these are fallible narrators to an extent. Eyewitness accounts are not perfect. They're actually quite bad statistically or in terms of evidence for like crimes and such. So you have to take everything in these accounts with a pinch of salt. You have to do it when I recall things, when these narrators and writers recall things. You have to take it with a pinch of salt. Importantly, up until this point in the match, Nicole played meticulously. She announced every trigger, even made sure to announce which land she was using to filter her prisms. She played at a very controlled but reasonable pace and was deliberate in each action she took. I was taken aback with the sudden change in demeanor and pace of play, and between marking down the life loss from Hopeless Nightmare and her quickly moving to my turn and casting the draw step scroll shift, I hadn't noticed that she didn't tap the mana for the Hopeless Nightmare. So we're in my draw step with a scroll shift targeting the Hopeless Nightmare after I'd drawn the only card in my hand, which happened to be Questing Druid for my turn, and I cast the Seek the Beast in response. I resolved my prize trigger and my spell, exiling Paw Patch formation and a land. She had no blockers and was at 3 life, facing down a 3/3 challenger. Having spent 4 of her 6 lands to cast a Hopeless Nightmare and scroll shift, except there were now 3 untapped lands across from me. Some spectators actually paused the match and pointed out that Nicole hadn't paid enough for her spells. It's important to note here that at Comp REL, people can ask you to pause and get a judge. They should not pause a match and interject with something that's happening. They should pause the game and get a judge. This actually is where the account of the non-cheater in this conversation, or the non-accident, maybe a cheat, starts to get a little bit weird to me. No one should be interrupting your match to tell either of you that a game state hasn't been met or a rule hasn't been done correctly. You pause the game and get a judge. Or at least that's my experience in anything above FNM. It looks like the judge was cool because the first judge came over and ruled that she didn't have to tap the land. I appealed, then Abe, the head judge, upheld the call. Their argument was that cards had been revealed from a hidden zone, so we couldn't back up a phase. I pleaded with judges to tell them that this would literally alter the outcome of the entire match, but they simply ignored me. I'm going to come back to talk more about the judge ruling towards the second half of this video. At this point, it appeared to me that I still had lethal. I attacked with Challenger, and Nicole cast another scroll shift, targeting her temporary lockdown, which I had to Paw Patch formation in response, unlocking a blocker and some card draw effects, allowing her to untap and kill me. Nicole was a Pro Tour player and a very good Magic player. She tanked on her turn for a normal chunk of time, and in her hand was Hopeless Nightmare, scroll shift, scroll shift. It is reasonable to assume that she had calculated this lethal line and determined it cost 1 too many mana. With me on 6 life, it would make no sense not to play the Hopeless Nightmare and blink it twice to end the game, if there was mana for that at all. There's a heavy inference here from Julian that it was a cheat, right? That is an intentional thing. He does go on to be careful about accusing it of cheating, but there's a heavy inference. He goes on to say that even with a bad judge call, there was still an opportunity to make things right, which I clearly brought to her attention. She could tap the land or just concede when dead on board. Instead, she chose to use the erroneous extra mana to stay alive, untap and kill me, and then mumble an apology. Whether she intended to cheat or just took advantage of a crappy call, I will never know, but I know it didn't feel good. The next round was called before I could collect my thoughts and yada yada yada. Basically, he had some friends help him out, and he ended up going 7-1-1. So congratulations, Julian. I'm not gonna, that bit's not that exciting for that, but it's good that if you did get cheated, you still rallied and got there. That's good. Again, we're gonna talk about the judge call and the sporting conduct of actually, you know, conceding when you've made a mistake that obviously altered the game, all after we've read through Nicole's reaction and apology. Nicole posted this to Blue Sky, as she's not on Twitter anymore. I wanted to apologise for a mistake I made in round 6 of Spotlight Series Atlanta. On turn 3 of extra turns, while I am certain that I intended to do so, I did not spend mana to cast a Hopeless Nightmare, and by the time it was brought to the attention of me and my opponent, we had both cast spells during my opponent's draw step. The head judge stated that too much had progressed for us to back up, and that I did not have to spend the mana that I should have paid for my spell during my turn. I proceeded to cast an additional spell using the mana that I should not have had access to if I had paid for the spell correctly on my turn, which altered the outcome of the match. She is being very clear that the outcome of the match was changed by the mistake and or, depending on how you look at it, the cheat. Cheating implies intent, and both the opponent of Nicole and obviously the judges did not see intent here, so did not describe it as cheating. If it was seen as a cheat, the judges would have issued a game loss. It would have been a much bigger penalty than what we actually had. It was an extremely stressful moment. We had already had a 60-minute judge call, and we were in turns 20 minutes past the end of the round. Just to be clear, for those of you that have never played at this level of Magic before, when you do a judge call and it gives you like 16 minutes of judge called timing, you get given extra time. This isn't a time extension on the current round. So your end of clock ends 16 minutes in this case past the end of the round for everyone else. When time is called, you go into extra turns, where there are 5 total turns taken. Active play, it's the first turn, then you go second turn for non-active, third for active, and so on. So this has gone 60 minutes past round time and then into extra turns as well, just to be clear on what she means by that. There's a large crowd of people surrounding us, something that was overwhelming for me. One of my opponent's teammates was screaming at the judge, complaining about his ruling and hurling insults at him. In the heat of the moment, the decision I chose to make was to go with what the head judge said to do, continue on with the board state as was. I now can see that it was wrong, and that by doing so, I deprived my opponent of the match win and gave myself the opportunity to win the match on the final turn. As a result of my heat of the moment decision making, I have let down my teammates, my friends, and myself. I know I'm going to face a lot of scrutiny moving forward, and I welcome it. This is truly not the kind of player I believe I strive to be. And only through time will I be able to work to regain the trust of this community. Julian, I'd appreciate the opportunity to apologize to you in private as well. So they absolutely owned it. And I think that's the right thing to do. No, the right thing to do was to not take that opportunity. Let's talk about that first. So in essence, to clarify, there was 7 mana's worth of spells cast off of 6 lands. Because the first spell in that sequence was a 1 mana spell, Hopeless Nightmare. This was cast without Nicole tapping any mana. Now, the real suspect thing of this whole part for me is that I don't think I've ever cast a spell in this situation, a sorcery speed spell like this, for example, and not tap the mana for it, like a 1 mana spell. I can understand mistapping, miscounting, for example, especially if you haven't tanked for a while, but casting a 1 mana spell and just not tapping mana for it sounds bonkers to me. Like, it's inherent to Magic is to tap some number of lands to cast your spells, right? So that is weird. What ended up happening through this potential mistake was that Nicole could cast 2 scroll shifts in her opponent's turn, one to flicker the Hopeless Nightmare to strip the card from hand of Julian, and would allow her to scroll shift her temporary lockdown to gobble up the creature that's representing lethal. The fact of the matter is, she should never have been able to cast 7 mana of spells with 6 lands. Now, the issue here is that at the point that it was caught, which was midway into Julian's turn, the judge that was called over had realized that there was no easy fix. In a sense, you couldn't rewind because cards had changed zones and hidden information had been revealed. For instance, Julian had drawn a card that was then attempted to be ripped out the hand at instant speed by flickering that discard enchantment, and then that spell was instant speed, so it was cast, bringing 2 more cards to the top of the library, and a load of information was revealed, and thus it was deemed impossible to rewind the game state back and fix the mana issues. As far as I understand it, a judge will try to rewind the game to fix issues, and if they can't, they will just have to let the game continue on. The argument is that both players should have maintained the game state by seeing how much mana was available or how much mana was being spent on spells. The problem is that logic, that argument, opens up this potential soft cheat or just a mistake that ends up giving a player more resources than they ever should have had in the game. The idea that too much information has been revealed and thus a rewind is impossible ends up giving the player who's tapped too few mana that extra mana, thus giving the player who's either cheating or making quite an egregious mistake at a competitive level a free Lotus Petal is absurd. This is not the outcome we should strive for nor allow. That said, the judge being called to the table may have made the correct judge call. And what I mean by that is that they are playing by the exact book of the situation. They are going by what is allowed of them in the current, strict rules in the judge's handbook, for lack of a better term. And the head judge did the same. Now, what I would say is that this gives us a very clear point that this was not the correct course of action to fix the situation. If she cheated or just accidentally made a simple mistake, both of those things led to having more resources than she should have had and changed the outcome of a competitive match. And thus, that is not an outcome we can allow. This should have been reversed. Now, could they have rewound the game? I'm not a judge. I've never pretended to be, but 3 cards were revealed, all of which could have been shuffled back into the library and they could have reset. I do not give a shit. I do not think this was unfixable in terms of a rewind. But that's arguably neither here nor there, but because the current rule document doesn't allow that, I think maybe some changes are in order. Or if you can't rewind in those circumstances of things that I'm missing here, then there needs to be a more stricter penalty for underpaying for your spells. Simply getting it noticed, I assume both of them got a warning for this, but who knows, that was not in either of the arguments. Getting a warning and then carrying on is absolutely not where we should be at. But why did that come to a pass? I mean, let's think about this in context of the information we can glean from both sides of the discussion here. They were in extra turns, they're 20 minutes over time. That is stressful for both players involved, especially if they've had a judge call previously, and this is they're both X and O or X and 1. They're still in the running to win money. There appears to be a crowd around them. According to Nicole, one of Julian's friends was shouting at a judge. I don't know what the fuck's going on in America, but if you shout at a judge in the UK or in Europe at an event, you're getting your team disqualified. I have no idea how true this part of the story is, but if it is, it's wild, because it would have absolutely escalated the situation for everyone involved. I'm surprised there wasn't harsher penalties involved. And beyond that, if the head judge has been called to for an appeal as this round goes over time by 20 minutes and they're in turns, this means that the entire tournament is being held up. This means that we've got a huge GP level spotlight event being held up by a appeal of a judge call that is going by the book. Now listen to this, okay? I'm not arguing that the head judge was incompetent here. That's obviously always an option, but that's not what I'm arguing. A user on my Discord, Tom, they said it really succinctly when we were discussing this earlier today. They said, I do really think that in times of stress, if you have a script, you stick with it. I think that's a natural human response and one development to help support people who have control over situations where personal biases could play a role. You have a head judge involved in a second, I assume heated if people are shouting in the background, judge call, or a round that's gone over time. And really, part of the TO experience is to get the fucking rounds done so everyone can get onto the next event and you can get the tournament to run smoothly. At this point, this game is making the entire event to not run smoothly. Now, I might be reading between the lines here. It might have been that actually everyone was really relaxed and there was no stresses here, but these sound stressful to me. So in that circumstance, the head judge defaulted to the script, to the judge's handbook, to the current legislation and rulings in terms of whether you can go back or not and what you do when there's been something missed like this. What I would argue is that script needs some re-examining or some changes made to it, because at the moment, the script that was defaulted to in a time of stress and like running over schedule ended up with someone winning a game of Magic where they had either cheated or they'd accidentally underpaid for their spells. And both of those are absolutely things we should not be allowing to happen at a competitive level of Magic. And then the etiquette thing. Nicole won, but the option was there to scoop, to concede against the lethal threat that she couldn't deal with the mana shared present, or even just tap the land that should have been tapped. She had options to fix the game state herself in a not by the book or by the rules way, but in a sporting conduct kind of way, in an etiquette kind of way. Although the judge was on her side, and I want to use that wording loosely, the judge had ruled basically in her favor because she was going to win the match, right? But in these circumstances where you know you've made a mistake, and the current rules don't have a way to fix that, let's say, not in the current situation, on the fucking gameplay floor as the round is over by like fucking 5 turns in 20 minutes. If you've made a mistake, that means that you're going to change the outcome of the match, and it shouldn't work that way via the rules of Magic. You have a duty to not take that edge. This user here, Nick Rick, on the subreddit, got downvoted into oblivion as they said, as a competitive player, I'm playing by the rules to the best of my ability. If it's ruled I don't have to spend the mana, I'm not spending the mana. So when a judge walks over and gets something wrong, or in this case, maybe even got it right by the book, but it's oh so obviously wrong by the intent and the agreement we all have moving into this fucking game, you think you should get a win? That's absolutely fucking ludicrous. The sporting and etiquette conversation should be, no, fuck that. It's your game. I fucked up. Now again, I'm going to give Nicole a slight benefit of the doubt here because of the supposedly high stressful environment. There is an element of what she has said also being potentially fallible, right? It may not have been as a stressful situation as it sounds. That's something you're going to frame it as to give an excuse for your poor actions, right? So maybe it's a lot more relaxed than I'm getting from the vibe of both these posts. But in the spur of the moment and the heat of the moment, she took the wrong route. She won through nefarious means, whether the initial mistake was intended or not. And she admits that in her post, which I think is reasonable. Something that I would like to see with this sort of stuff is, in recent times, someone had played a rule wrong in a Warhammer tournament and they went on to say after the fact that they played the rule wrong and wanted their loss to reflect as a win and so on for like world points and such. If there's prize money on the line and you've placed for prizing, you should probably have that changed too, right? You can't change the entire standings of the tournament, and that's the problem with cheating or even allowing accidents to cause these sort of issues. It detracts from the entire integrity and everyone else involved with it in terms of standings and placings. But if you placed the money and someone else didn't, then that should be passed on. The exact ways you implement that are very difficult and maybe not actually doable, but it's something that should be looked at, I think. There is a good chance this was just an innocent mistake, and in that case, it should have been rectified somehow via the judge intervention to allow the player that was having the mistake pressed against them to not be punished by said mistake. It should not reward the person making the mistake, especially if that mistake might be, as we talked about last week, soft cheating. The idea that you make mistakes on purpose and then just claim the mistakes when you get caught out. And in this case, you claim it's a mistake when you're getting caught out potentially, and then the judge is like, fine, just carry on, have your extra mana, have your Lotus Petal. It's absolutely bonkers, and it should not be the way that competitive Magic works. I'm normally always on the side of the judges. I'm not even saying the judges in this case were in the wrong, but I do think that the judging document and how we deal with these situations is imperfect and needs some reflection on. So let me know what you think in the comment section below, and let's not resort to fucking personal attacks on anyone involved for the way they write or who they are, or especially judges too. Here's another one I've seen. The community is really pissing me off with this. There is a portion of the community who really wants to point out when judges may have got it wrong because they have a vendetta against the judge program. It's normally online, like minor Twitter personality, like grinders, you know, the Tor and SCG sort of grinder crowd from back in the day. Probably because they're all a bunch of nefarious little pricks who get caught out by judges a lot and thus don't like judges because judges are stopping them from getting away with shit. That is conjecture, but that is just a vibe I'm getting from these people. So let's just call it with like all judges are bad, everybody's cheating, and let's just call it with a fucking bigotry as well. That's got no fucking space in this conversation. I'm Vince, also known as PleasantKenobi on the internet. If you want to support the content that I make, my Patreon link is down below as well. Have a civil conversation in the comments, and I'll see you down there. Ta-ta for now.